As the planning committee had sort of designed the conference, that this last day we're trying to move to a future vision, or what I would like to term as sustainability, which I think means a lot of things to a lot of different people. As I travel up and down to the Klamath, you start at Bly, Chiloquin, Klamath Falls. You go on down Sead, Happy Camp, Orleans, Wichipec. These were timber-dependent communities that no longer have a sustainable resource that they're able to utilize. The thing I think that the committee has sort of wants us to start to focus on. You know, we're who we are, what we've done. We're working on restoration projects throughout the basin. We're starting to get to know each other better. But this question of sustainability, how do we get back to communities in which we can, as we'd heard earlier in the conference, so we're telling our kids and grandkids, there's no future for you here. Go to college, get a job someplace else. I think we would like to start to try to, or at least I would, and I think the committee also, is how do we then encourage those kids to go to college and come back? Where in this whole picture in the future are we going to be able to tell our kids, yeah, go away to college, get an education, and come back to the community? Hopefully our speaker this morning, Jane O'Keefe, is going to give us an example of how a community has been able to do that. I knew of Jane before I'd actually met Jane through her reputation as a leader in her community. She comes with a broad background. She's got private business experience. She's been an elected official locally. She's had the experience of lobbying at the federal level in Washington, D.C. to support this vision that they had in her community. The vision that they have is of sustainable watersheds, sustainable landscapes, sustainable communities, sustainable social things. And even though her community is much smaller than the Klamath, I think that's one of the issues that we had with our presentation from Walau is, yes, you can make this work in a community of 7,000 people, but how do we make this work in the Klamath? Because of our extensive area, the distance, the differences in two states, multi-agencies, multi-different interest groups that are there. But hopefully, Jane is going to give us some insight on how they did that in their community, and keep in mind how we can apply this as an example for sustainability for the Klamath. Help me welcome Jane O'Keefe.
Thank you, Ron, and good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you. Well, I have to do something that a speaker hates to do. I have to start out by disappointing you. I've been observing this conference now for 2 days, and I know how much you love PowerPoints, and I don't have one. I'm really sorry. But I'm going to make up for that. In the middle of this speech, I'm going to tell you something that I've never admitted publicly before, and it may absolutely horrify you. So listen for that. Should keep you awake. 2002, if you remember, was one of the worst fire years in southern Oregon's history. There were 2 big fires. The first one was the Winter Toolbox Complex in Lake County, and it burned a lot of acres. And then the second one, and probably the more famous one, was the Biscuit Fire. And I'm sure you've all heard about that. Both fires were similar in nature, started by lightning and put out by a huge fire suppression effort. But what happened after these fires was very different. After the Winter Toolbox Fire, the Forest Service put up salvage sales. The sales were supported by the local community, and with some tweaking by outside interests, mainly the environmental community, the sales were supported. After the Biscuit Fire, the sales, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, and the sales basically went through. After the Biscuit Fire, the Forest Service and the BLM put up salvage, again supported by the local communities, and were immediately embroiled in bitter litigation. In the end, very little timber was salvaged out of the Biscuit Fire. What few people know is that the very same people who were working quietly and thoughtfully to ensure an environmentally acceptable salvage in sale in Lake County were fighting tooth and nail over salvage of the biscuit. Today I'd like to tell you how we got to that point in Lake County, and a lot of it my personal story too, and a few of the lessons that we've learned along the way. It all started in Lake County in the 1950s when the Forest Service, when the Federal Sustained Yield Unit was formed by the Chief of the Forest Service. The unit designated approximately 600,000 acres in the Fremont National Forest a Federal Sustained Yield Unit. What this means is that all of the timber harvested in an amount set annually, generally it was about 40 million board feet a year, must be milled in either the cities of Lakeview or Paisley. And in return for that, the mills could not buy outside federal timber, so it was called a closed unit. And that unit worked really, really well for Lakeview and Paisley for several years, up until about the 1990s when timber sales became difficult all over the Pacific Northwest. Lawsuits were shutting down timber sales, and the unit was not immune. Mills could not operate without a predictable amount of timber, and one by one they shut down. And in 1997, the future of the unit looked bleak. Lake County was down to one sawmill, and the Fremont sawmill in Lakeview, with only one mill, and the Chief of the Forest Service could declare that unit void because there had to be competition for those sales within the closed unit. I was the county commissioner at the time, and like everybody else, I was concerned for the economic health of our community when that mill closed. My initial response was, remember, I'm a county commissioner, so I called a meeting. And we had a sustained yield unit committee, 3 citizens who advised us about the efficacy of the unit. And to me, this group just seemed too small to deal with such a big problem. So we added a few people: the Chamber of Commerce director, the mill manager, and a local rancher. And we sat around a table and we vented. And we seethed at environmentalists who filed lawsuits. And we were not happy with the Forest Service. They could go ahead and cut that timber, put the sales up, and lawsuits be damned, and they didn't. We lamented the loss of the glory days of the timber industry. And we talked about the folly of people who did not know, as we did, that the unit was in good ecological condition. And after an hour of this, we agreed to meet again. So we did, 2 more times. And we talked again about how angry we were, and about how we hated lawsuits, and about the people that filed the lawsuits. And the collective wisdom of our little group was not ever challenged, and certainly not by me. As we were scheduling our 4th meeting, I think everybody realized that we were not accomplishing anything except maybe making ourselves feel a little better. The 4th meeting was when the progress began to happen. The mill manager began to talk about how Collins companies, their company, managed their own lands. Collins didn't just rely on their own judgment about the effects of their practices. The company invited third parties in to verify that they are managing in an environmentally responsible, socially beneficial, and economically viable way. The process was called third-party certification. Our group became sold on the idea of certification. We started to think big. Why not get the unit certified? In fact, I thought we knew that the unit was already managed in an economically viable and responsible way. I thought we knew that the social and ecological values would return if timber harvest was allowed to return. And finally, we agreed that if an independent third party would certify the unit, then there would be no basis and no argument that the actions taken on the forest were not correct. Lawsuits would have no basis. We could get things right back to the way they were. Creative juices were flowing, and we scheduled a 5th meeting. We were starting to look out the windshield instead of through the rearview mirror, and it felt pretty good. We asked for help from Sustainable Northwest, its mission, a nonprofit in Portland. Its mission is to partner with communities and enterprises to achieve economic, ecological, and community vitality and resilience. Worked for us, that's what we wanted to do too. We knew that there were problems with our proposal. For this to work, there would have to be massive changes in federal law in regards to national forest management. And we realized that these changes would probably not just happen because a few of us had a brilliant idea. We knew that a sweeping certification proposal would be somewhat controversial, and we hoped that perhaps the existence of the unit would allow us pilot status to test the idea for a nationwide proposal. We didn't need a report from the state to tell us that the economic statistics of Paisley and Lakeview were bleak. Unemployment was at 17%, and that was just the people that stayed. Lots of people had to leave. Because schools were losing enrollment as young families left town to seek employment elsewhere, we knew that our local annual income was 15% under statewide average because local businesses were closing or cutting back. We felt that we had the key to economic recovery for our towns with our certifications idea, and we felt a compelling local urgency to act. It was time to take our plan public. We needed to create a groundswell of support for a pilot proposal. We wanted to offer people some glimpse of light at the end of our dark economic tunnel. We turned our attention to the Forest Service, presenting local and regional officials with the certification proposal. They were tepidly encouraging. They told us that we weren't the first people to think of this and indicated that they were in the process of developing policy around certification. However, they did not give us the feeling that they were in any hurry to embrace certification. We wanted the Forest Service to think outside of the box with us. Warned of emerging controversy about the idea of certification on federal lands, we were told that the Forest Service would be much more likely to support certification pilot if we formed an alliance with the critics of the idea. Guess who was skeptical of certification of federal lands? Environmentalists. The same people who were filing those lawsuits to shut down our forests. Environmentalists were not at all concerned that certification was a way to ensure that the forest was managed in an environmentally sensitive way. In fact, our understanding of their objections was that if management would be certified, then commercial activities, such as logging, would commence unabated. Once again, our efforts to do good things in the forest, like logging, were being thwarted by environmentalists, and we wondered where to start. We simply did not see a way to deal with unreasonable people and began to feel some pretty familiar despair. Now, as you know, the United States Forest Service is a public agency. When you make a proposal to the Forest Service, it's not secret for very long. So not long after we made a serious presentation about our pilot proposal, we were personally targeted for promoting certification on federal lands. We looked at a discussion website on the internet on federal certification and saw our names individually listed. People were asking each other who these radicals were. We were radicals. We were amazed at the scorn that unknown people heaped on us for advancing an idea. So we got mad at environmentalists again. And all of a sudden, we knew what to do. This time we decided that we needed to do something to get attention for our idea and to show the shallowness of our opposition's position. We decided if one wants to talk about certifying the unit, then you need to log off the internet and come to Lake County. So we planned a large gathering in Lakeview and Paisley, inviting federal officials, timber companies, local folks, and with the Forest Service's edict in mind, even environmentalists, to come to town and talk about certification. I knew two things when we embarked upon the venture. First, I knew that the unit was in fine shape. The people would come to town and the forest, and they would see that themselves. And I knew this unequivocally because it was undisputed local knowledge. Second, I knew we were right about certification. People, again, would come to town, they'd learn about certification, and agree that it was the key to stopping conflict in the forest. I knew this because of personal research in certification and our extremely positive groupthink. We realized that misguided environmentalists might be hesitant to come to our community to discuss controversial ideas. Resource-dependent rural communities in Oregon were not known as welcoming havens for members of the environmental community. The Chamber of Commerce director and I went to Seattle, Portland, and Eugene to issue personal invitations to members of the environmental community. I expected we would be rebuffed, and instead the people I met were astonishingly open to come to our community. They also had a surprising amount of knowledge about the unit. I went to Washington, D.C. and appealed to national environmental groups and the Forest Service's chief's office to become involved, and they all said yes. We planned an agenda that would allow attendees to understand our local community, our forest, and certification. We invited scientists to give everyone an understanding of the unit's ecosystem. We had certifiers on the agenda to learn about certification, and local folks on the agenda making presentations so that people could better understand our wonderful local communities. Personally, although I was sure the event would be a great success, something was bothering me. A few things I had heard along the way weren't in sync with my firmly held belief that the unit was in great shape ecologically. Our local forest supervisor told me one day that when he was transferred to the Fremont, he took an overview flight. And he said when he got done with that flight, his thought was that forest had been rode hard and put up wet. Well, this man was no raging environmentalist. In fact, I kind of thought he was more of a cowboy. Why would he say that? When I was issuing these personal invitations to come to town, many environmentalists made remarks about how the unit would be best abolished, and that entirely too much timber had been removed, and that there were severe ecological problems associated with overharvesting. I began to hear that the scientists that we had asked to come to speak to our gathering might not paint an entirely rosy picture. And I ignored it all. After all, everybody in our community knew things were fine in the forest. Well, that was until about 4 days before everybody came to town. On a hot day in July, just before the gathering was to take place, a pilot from Lighthawk, which is an environmental organization that provides people with an opportunity to take overview flights for environmental causes, came to town. And I got on the plane and took an airborne tour of the unit. And I have to tell you, it was a horrible flight. Lightning was zapping, it was raining, and I saw that something that had been great for our community was not necessarily great for the land. I'm no forester, nor am I an ecologist, but I couldn't deny that I saw a forest in need of help. I saw large clear cuts that had not grown back. I saw diseases and bug kill. I felt like I'd just gotten slapped upside the head, and it hurt. All of a sudden, I wasn't really looking forward to that event that we'd so carefully planned. I was scheduled to make the keynote address, and I couldn't think of what I was going to say to our invited guests and community members who were my friends and supporters. I had lost sight of the clear path that I thought we were following. I wanted this event to be a success for our community, and I had defined success as bringing people around to our point of view. Unfortunately, I knew I could no longer give the glib and patronizing, welcoming speech I had prepared. The speech where I would welcome those environmentalists to town and then tell them in front of my adoring constituents that they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Needless to say, I made some quick revisions. Well, I gave that revised speech, and the next day we all got to work. The scientists started the day with their assessments. We were oriented both geographically and environmentally. They said all those things I were afraid they were going to say. The certifiers explained their process, and they said everything I'd hoped they'd say. By the end of the first day, I realized, as expected, that we had lost control of the outcome, and I knew that was a good thing. The next day, we went out to the forest, and here it is. Personally, I hate field tours. You can all leave in disgust if you want. But I like policy discussions in smoky back rooms. I'm a county commissioner. Now you know. Usually, I end up standing around listening to people talk about things that I only marginally understand. I remember I'm too cold, I'm too hot, the bugs are biting me. I rarely remember anything significant taking place. And to top it off, everyone around me is having the time of their lives exclaiming how great it is to be out on the ground, out of the office. Okay. Now you know. I couldn't tell you what the temperature was that first day that we went out in the field, and I couldn't tell you if the bugs were biting. I can tell you, however, that I learned that many people can look at the same piece of ground and see entirely different things. I knew instantly that all the shared learning that we went through that day had paid off in spades. The respectful disagreements began, and so did the understanding. We talked about past frustrations and present conditions and desired future conditions. I got back on the bus knowing that we weren't going to agree to ask the Forest Service to certify the unit. I also suspected that this wasn't the end of our dream, but the beginning of an unanticipated journey. The final day, we were back in meeting mode, and everybody got to have their final say. We all agreed that we wanted to go forward together. We agreed that a healthy forest was more important than a process such as certification. And we agreed that we wanted to keep the unit, although with a more modern statement of goals. We agreed that we did not waste our time in Lakeview and Paisley those hot July days. And I found the definition of we had enlarged by about 90 people. Our local group met soon after that gathering and put into motion a course of action that would ultimately produce a proposed unit statement to the Chief of the Forest Service for reauthorization. First, we commissioned a thorough third-party assessment of the ecological health of the unit. When that assessment was complete, we were not shocked by the results. It was not all disaster out there on the forest, but there was a lot of work to do. Next, we hired a skilled facilitator to guide us through the process of creating a new goal statement for the unit. We started out by carefully selecting the participants in the process. We added several local people that had popped up during the previous year's gathering. We asked several members of the environmental community to come back to Lake County for the process. Our facilitator looked at the group and pointed out that we had not included the future of our communities, the youth, in our process. So we went to the local high schools in Lakeview and Paisley and recruited some youth to join us. We planned a now familiar agenda starting with shared learning, on-the-ground tours, and ending with creating a vision and goals. By now I had learned that I would not walk in the door with a vision and goals in my pocket. Wasn't worth it. The group started working together as though we had just gotten off the bus a year ago. The new members assimilated quickly, and it quickly proved to be the right to include youth in a meaningful way. At the end of the process, we were struggling with getting just the right wording for our goals. A high school student stood up and read her version of our discussions. She had captured the heart of the group's intent, and here's what she read. The unit was established in recognition of the important interrelationships between the Fremont National Forest and the local communities of Paisley and Lakeview, to promote their economic stability. However, the understanding of the relationship has broadened greatly. The policy recognizes that the forest must be treated with a new respect and that sustainability requires holistic solutions. It also acknowledges that community economic stability is dependent on a healthy forest, and that the responsibility for creating and maintaining this health requires new relationships and collaboration, with commitments from everyone to work towards ecological, social, and economic stability. Accordingly, this policy statement includes goals and monitoring criteria intended to promote a sustainable forest ecosystem within the unit area. The timber beasts, the local businessmen, the ranchers, the politicians, and the kids and the environmentalists all agreed on that statement. Nobody had to give ground on deeply held convictions. We achieved this by respectfully listening to each other and working with the language until everybody was comfortable. Well, it was time to approach the Chief of the Forest Service. We presented a show of support from the community as well as editorial support for our proposed language to Forest Service personnel at the highest levels as well as to congressional staff. I expected them to be blown away by our brilliance. They told us we'd produced a nice try. They assured us that Chief Dombeck would not be looking at our efforts positively because the push in Washington was to abolish sustained yield units, not reauthorize them. In fact, the Chief's senior staff left us feeling most discouraged. Luckily, the Chief's assistant was one of those people that we had kept informed every step of the way. He liked our approach, and he liked our results. He must have informed the Chief that we were in town and that we had something to say. The next day, we participated in a drama that would have been the defining moments of the federal stewardship movie. We gathered in a conference room with the Chief's senior staff, and they began to give us the news that our efforts were not going to be rewarded. Suddenly, the Chief entered the room. It was obvious that nobody had anticipated his attendance. He welcomed us and spoke with knowledge of our efforts. Then he turned to his senior staff members and individually he told them that he understood that they may have some issues with our proposed reauthorization of the unit, but he was absolutely sure that we could resolve those problems. He thanked us for coming all the way to Washington, D.C., apologized for not being able to stay for the rest of the meeting, and assured us that his people could work this out. Well, all of a sudden, they could resolve our issues. In fact, they were darn glad to resolve our issues as fast as they could. So, true to his words, on the last day of the Clinton administration, his last day on the job, Chief Dombeck signed the reauthorization of the Lakeview Federal Sustained Yield Unit, renaming it the Stewardship Unit in the process. Dombeck gave us 10 years to put our money where our collective mouths were. We had a policy victory. Yeah, to once like me, that was huge. This whole process started when the local sawmill closed and left the existence of the unit in doubt. Most of the local people started their involvement because of their concern for the economic health of the community. Nobody lost sight of that goal, but we did create some unanticipated ecological language when we asked for reauthorization. We also had not as yet produced one single additional job in the forest. And I was keenly aware that, at least locally, this was how we were going to be judged. Well, our group has stayed together now for almost 7 years. Lately, we've started to achieve those difficult economic and ecological victories. We have more local contractors working in the woods on restoration projects. We have funded a monitoring project through federal Title II dollars that will provide an independent third-party look at the effects of actions on the forest and provided local employment at the same time. We are looking hard at a biomass plant. Our friends from afar keep coming to town, and as I said before, in 2002, forest fires raged through the Fremont Forest and the Stewardship Unit. After a fire, the Forest Service and the community immediately pushed to salvage the burnt timber. Our group went to the ground and agreed that we would not take traditional sides on the salvage debate, but instead we would evaluate the proposed actions through the lens of the goals of the unit. We agreed that we could support some salvage, and when the lawsuits were threatened, our friends brokered a compromise that allowed a significant amount of harvest to come to the local mill, but yet remain true to the ecological goals of the unit. This is how we work through all of our issues. We run proposed actions on the unit through the filter of the unit goals. If they're still standing at the end, we support. If not, we oppose. The forest and the community are healthier for this approach. Strangely, in 2005, the Forest Service declared our stewardship unit was a pilot for certification on national forests. Our group did not solicit or oppose the proposal. We are focused on forest and community health, and certification seems almost like yesterday's news. Many lessons were learned along the way, and I'd like to tell you about a few of them. Here's the most significant personal lesson I learned. Any time spent acquiring, maintaining, or provoking enemies is time wasted in your life that you will never get back. I started this process with fire in my belly to show those horrible environmentalists that they were wrong and that we were right, and we would prevail and crush them, and we'd feel pretty good about it. When I started the process, I had enemies and a forest and a community in need of help. Today, I have friends and colleagues and a forest and hopefully a community that is headed towards ecological health. When I gave up my enemies, I had a lot more productive time to work towards something positive. Here's another one. Resolving environmental conflicts takes time, shared learning, and tours. We did not get to where we are today by not spending a huge amount of time together in meetings listening to each other, just like you're doing now. One of the most valuable things we did was to take the time to listen to, challenge, and dissect scientific assessments together. Sound familiar? I think that's what you're doing. We stand around, we kick the dirt, and find our compromises in the forest. Get together, learn together, and stay together. With all due respect to Tam Moore, who's sitting in front of me, beware of the media. As a group, we made a conscious decision not to make big media splashes as we worked through our issues. We thought we were doing something kind of groundbreaking, and yet we did not solicit a lot of press. We felt that the presence of the media would keep us in our traditional bunkers. We would be forced to make comments to the press every step of the way and air our disagreements before we had a chance to resolve them. This approach worked very well for us, but it did keep us from getting public credit for our work as we went along. As you craft your solutions, please occasionally look around and ask yourself, who's not here? We did this 3 times. If you identify a missing segment of the stakeholders involved, stop and find some representatives. We would not be where we were today if we had not decided to take a huge leap of faith and invite members of the environmental communities to come to town. Later, it was pointed out that we had excluded youth. If we hadn't included a few students, our mission statement would have been different. This practice can slow you down, but if you're looking for lasting solutions, it's important. The people you exclude today can be the ones that stop you cold tomorrow. And if I would to make one observation of this conference, and I don't know everybody here, it looks like there are, from Oregon, not a lot of project and off-project irrigators. I'd suggest make sure that they're included as you go forward. We chose collaboration over consensus. We avoided the federal advisory group process. From time to time, we were asked if we would like to formalize our stewardship group's relationship with the Forest Service via a federal advisory group. We chose not to go down this road. I'm not knocking these groups, it just wasn't for us. Our main reason was that we didn't want to be limited to only one member of each federally identified group. If you come to our meetings, you are a member of the stewardship group. You don't have to represent anybody, you're a member. We also didn't want our conversations formalized. With our collaborative, we could bring our strengths to the table. We knew that sometimes we have to give and take, but all in all, each person brings strengths that makes our achievements greater. Finally, I'd like to leave you with this piece of advice from somebody who has observed the events of the basin from next door. The issues of the basin are your problems. You solve it. Together, all of you. Be honest with each other. Do that shared learning. You all know about the water quality and quantity issues in the basin. What are you going to do about it? Take the time you need and do it right. Set timelines for yourself internally, but don't let anybody else, be it federal or state, drive the process. There are great things happening. Keep them going. Take control and keep control. Politicians can be extremely helpful along the way, but help them help you. Go to them with collaboratively produced solutions. Right now, I hear a lot of anticipation about a proposed governor's summit. Quite frankly, unless you folks come to that summit with your own solutions, that gathering is going to be a lot of false hope and hot air. If you don't have something for them to work on, wait and tell them to wait until you do. If you create a collaborative solution, everyone, from the president to your congressional delegations, to your governors, to your county commissioners and supervisors, will jump on board and make it happen. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to this great group. I think you're on the right track, and I wish you well as you move forward together.